Preface. For me, the myth of Sisyphus marks the beginning of an idea which I was to pursue in The Rebel. It attempts to resolve the problem of suicide, as The Rebel attempts to resolve that of murder. In both cases without the aid of eternal values, which temporarily perhaps are absent or distorted in the contemporary Europe. The fundamental subject of the myth of Sisyphus is this: it is legitimate and necessary to wonder whether life has a meaning. Therefore, it is legitimate to meet the problem of suicide face to face. The answer underlying and appearing through the paradox which covers it is this: even if one does not believe in God, suicide is not legitimate. Written 15 years ago, in 1940, amid the French and European disaster, this book declares that even within the limits of nihilism, it is impossible to find the means to proceed beyond nihilism. In all the books I have written since, I have attempted to pursue this direction, although the myth of Sisyphus poses a mortal problems. It sums itself up for me as a lucid invitation to live and to create in the very midst of the desert. It has hence been thought possible to append to this philosophical argument a series of essays of a kind I have never ceased writing, which are somewhat marginal to my other books. In a more lyrical form, they all illustrate that essential fluctuation from assent to refusal, which in my view defines the artist and his difficult calling. The unity of this book that I should like to be apparent to American readers as it is to me reside in the reflection, alternatively cold and impassioned, in which an artist may indulge as to his reasons for living and for creating. After 15 years, I have progressed beyond several of the positions which are set down here, but I have remained faithful. It seems to me to the exigency which prompted them. That is why this book is, in a certain sense, the most personal of those I have published in America. More than the others, therefore, it has need of the indulgence and understanding of its readers. Comic, Paris, March 1955. Contents: absurd reasoning, first. Second, the absurd man. And third, absurd creation. The myth of Sisyphus, Appendix Hope and the absurd in the work of Franz Kafka. He is Jewish. Summer in Algiers, the Minotaurus, or the Stop in Oran, Helen exile. Helen, you mean the Troy War? Return to Tisapa. The artist and the time.
work. But it is useful to 54살 수요일입니다. The Myth of Sisyphus for Pascal Pierre. Oh, my soul, do not aspire to immortal life, but exhaust the limits of the possible. Pinder, Pythian. 3. The pages that follow deal with an absurd sensitivity that can be found widespread in the age, and not with an absurd philosophy which our time properly speaking, is not known. It is therefore simply fair to point out at the outset what these pages owe to certain contemporary thinkers. It is so far from my intention to hide this that they will be found cited and commented upon throughout this work. But it is useful to note at the same time that the absurd, hitherto taken as a conclusion, is considered in this essay as a starting point. In this sense, it may be said that there is something provisional in my commentary. One cannot prejudge the position it entails. There will be found here merely the description in the pure state of an intellectual melody. No metaphysic, no belief is involved in it for the moment. These are the limits and the only bias of this book. Certain personal experiences urge us to make this clear. Unabsurd reasoning. Absurdity and suicide. There is but one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. Judging whether life is or is not worth living amount to answering the fundamental question of philosophy. All the rest, whether or not the world has 3 dimensions, whether the mind has 9 or 12 categories, comes afterwards. These are games. One must first answer. And if it is true, as Nietzsche claims, that a philosopher, to deserve our respect, must preach by example, you can you can appreciate the importance of that reply. For it will precede the definite acts. These are facts their hearts can feel, yet they call for careful study before they become clear to the intellect. If I ask myself how to judge that this question is more urgent than that, I reply that one judges by the actions it entails. I have never seen anyone die for the ontological argument. Galileo, who held the scientific truth of great importance, abjured it with the greatest ease as soon as it endangered his life. In a certain sense, he did right. The truth was not worth the stake. Whether the earth or the sun revolves around the other is a matter of profound indifference. To tell the truth, it is a futile question. On the other hand, I see many people die because they judge that life is not worth living. I see others paradoxically getting killed for the idea or illusions that give him a reason for living. What is called a reason for living is also an excellent reason for dying. I therefore conclude that the meaning of life is the most urgent of questions. How to answer it? On all essential problems, I mean thereby those that run the risk of leading to death or those that intensify the passion of living. There are probably but 2 methods of thought, the method of La Palisse and the method of Don Quixote. Solely the balance between evidence and lyricism can allow us to achieve simultaneously emotion and lucidity in a subject at once so humble and so heavy with emotion. The learned and classical dialectic must yield, one can see, to a more modest attitude of mind deriving at one and the same time from common sense and understanding. Suicide has never been dealt with except as a social phenomenon. On the contrary, we are concerned at the outset with the relationship between individual thought and suicide. An act like this is prepared within the silence of the heart. As is a great work of art, the man himself is ignorant of it. One evening, he pulls the trigger or jumps. Of an apartment building manager who had killed himself, I was told that he had lost his daughter 5 years before, that he had changed greatly since then, that experience had undermined him. A more exact word cannot be imagined. Beginning to think is beginning to be undermined. Society has but little connection with such beginnings. The worm is in man's heart, that is where it must be sought. One must follow and understand this fatal game that leads from lucidity in the face of existence to flight from light.
The train bound for Dunkirk is now approaching.
There are many causes for suicide, and generally the most obvious ones were not the most powerful. Really, it is rarely suicide committed through reflection.
There are many causes for suicide, and generally the most obvious ones were not the most powerful. Rarely is suicide committed, yet the hypothesis is not excluded through reflection. But the force of the crisis is almost always unverifiable. Newspapers often speak of personal sorrows or of incurable illness. These explanations are possible, but one would have to know whether a friend of the desperate man had not that very day addressed him indifferently. He is the guilty one, for that is enough to precipitate all the rancors and hold the boredom still in suspension. But if it is hard to fix the precise instance, the subtle step when the mind opted for death, it is easier to deduce from the act itself the consequences it implies. In a sense, and as in melodrama, killing yourself amounts to confessing. It is confessing that life is too much for you, or that you do not understand it. Let's not go too far in such analogies, however. Rather return to everyday words. It is merely confessing that it's not worth the trouble. Living natural is never easy. You continue making the gestures commanded by existence for many reasons, the first of which is habit. Dying voluntarily implies that you have recognized, even instinctively, the ridiculous character of that habit, the absence of any profound reason for living, the insane character of that daily agitation, and the uselessness of suffering. A stranger. His exile is without remedy, since he is deprived of when then is that incalculable feeling that deprives the mind of the sleep necessary to life. A world that can be explained even with better reasons is a familiar world. But on the other hand, in a universe suddenly divested of illusions and lights, man feels an alien and a stranger. His exile is without remedy, since he is deprived of the memory of a lost home or the hope of a promised land. This divorce between man and his life, the actor and his setting, with better reasons, is a familiar world. But on the other hand, in a universe suddenly divested of illusions and lights, man feels an alien and a stranger. His exile is without remedy, since when then is that incalculable feeling that deprives the mind of the sleep necessary to life. A world that can be explained even with better reasons is a familiar world. But on the other hand, in a universe suddenly divested of illusions and lights, man feels an alien and a stranger. His exile is without remedy, since he is deprived of the memory of a lost home or the hope of a promised land. This divorce between man and his life, the actor and his setting, is properly the feeling of absurdity. All healthy men having thought of their own suicide, it can be seen without further explanation that there is a direct connection between this feeling and the longing for death. The subject of this essay is precisely this relationship between the absurd and suicide, the exact degree to which suicide is a solution to the absurd. The principle can be established that for a man who does not cheat what he believes to be true must determine his action. Belief in the absurdity of existence must then dictate his conduct. It is legitimate to wonder clearly and without false pathos whether a conclusion of this importance requires a forsaking as rapidly as possibly an incomprehensible condition. I am speaking, of course, of men inclined to be in harmony with themselves. Stated clearly, this problem may seem both simple and in solution, but it is wrongly assumed that simple questions involve answers that are no less simple, and that evidence implies evidence. A primary and reversing the terms of the problem, just as one does or does not kill oneself, it seems that there are two philosophical solutions. Either yes or no. This would be too easy, but allowance must be made for those who, without concluding, continue questioning. Here I am, only slightly indulging in irony. This is the majority. I notice also that those who answered no act as if they thought yes. As a matter of fact, if I accept the Nietzschean criterion, they think yes in one way or another. On the other hand, it often happens that those who commit suicide were assured of the meaning of life. These contradictions are constant. It may even be said that they have never been so keen as on this point where, on the contrary, logic seems so desirable. It is commonplace to compare philosophical theories and the behavior of those who profess them, but it must be said that of the thinkers who refuse the meaning to life, none except Kirillov, who belongs to literature, Peregrinos, who is born of legend, and Julius Laqueur, who belongs to hypothesis, admitted his logic to the point of refusing that life. Schopenhauer is often cited as a fit subject for laughter because he praises suicide while seated at a well-set table. This is no subject for joking. That way of not taking the tragic seriously is not so grievous, but it helps to judge a man. In the face of such contradictions and obscurities, must we conclude that there is no relationship between the opinion one has about life and the act one commits to live it? Let us not exaggerate in this direction. In a man's attachment to life, there is something stronger than all the ills in the world. The body's judgment is as good as the mind's, and the body shrinks from annihilation with getting to the habit of living before acquiring the habit of thinking. In that race which daily hastens us toward death, the body maintains its irreparable lead. In short, the essence of that contradiction lies in what I shall call the act of eluding, because it is both less and more than division in the Pascalian sense. Eluding as the invariable game, the typical act of eluding, the fatal evasion that constitutes the third theme of this essay is hope of another life. One must deserve or trickery of those who live not for life itself, but for some great idea that will transcend it, define it, give it a meaning, and betray it. Thus, okay. Thus, everything contributes to spreading confusion, peritor, and it has not been wasted effort. People have played on words and pretended to believe that refusing to grant a meaning to life necessarily leads to declaring that it is not worth living. In truth, there is no necessary common measure between these two judgments. One merely has to refuse to be misled by the confusions, divorces, and inconsistencies previously pointed out. One must brush everything aside and go straight to the real problem. One kills oneself because life is not worth living. That is certainly a truth, yet an unfruitful one because it is a truism. But does that insult to existence, that flat denial in which it is plunged, come from the fact that it has no meaning? Does its absurdity requires one to escape it through hope or suicide? This is what must be clarified, hunted down, and elucidated while brushing aside all the rest. Does the absurd dictate death? This problem must be given priority over others outside all methods of thought and all exercises of the disinterested mind. Series of meaning contradictions, the psychology that an objective mind can always introduce into all problems have no place in this pursuit and this passion. It calls simply for an unjust, in other words, logical thought that is not easy. It is always easy to be logical. It is almost impossible to be logical to the better end. Men who die by their own hand consequently follows to its conclusion their emotional inclination. Reflection on suicide gives me an opportunity to raise the only problem to interest me. Is there a logic to the point of death? I cannot know unless I pursue, without reckless passion, in the sole light of evidence, the reasoning of which I am here suggesting the source. This is what I call an absurd reasoning. Many have begun it. I do not yet know whether or not they kept to it. When Karl Jaspers, revealing the impossibility of constituting the world as an unity, exclaims, "This limitation leads me to myself, where I can no longer withdraw behind an objective point of view that I am merely representing, where neither I myself nor the existence of others can any longer become an object for me." He is evoking after many others those waterless deserts, where thought reaches to its confines after many others. Yes, indeed, but how eager they were to get out of them. At that last crossroad where thought hesitates, many men have arrived, and even some of the humblest. They then abdicated what was most precious to them, their life. Others, princes of the mind, abdicated likewise, but they initiated the suicide of their thoughts in its purest revolt. The real effort is to stay there, rather insofar as that is possible, and to examine closely the old vegetation of those distant regions. Tenacity and acumen are privileged spectators of this inhuman show in which absurdity, hope, and death carry on their dialogue, the mind can then analyze the figures of that elementary yet subtle dance before illustrating them and reviling them itself. Absurd was